members of the Judiciary Committee. My name is Mike Geiermann. I'm an attorney in Bismarck. I've had the opportunity to serve as legal counsel for the North Dakota Education Association and now NDU for the last 30 years. I'm not here to necessarily present to you any arguments in regards to teachers. President Archuleta has done that. Teachers are against this bill. They don't want guns in schools. You know that. But I'm here to give you a different perspective, and I was unable to testify in the House because there was just too much testimony, and so I wanted to make sure that I got in here in the Senate. Besides representing teachers, I represent police officers. I represent the North Dakota Fraternal Order of Police. In 2001, I was approached by two Bismarck police officers, Bob Benson and Steve Kenner, to become the lawyer for the North Dakota Fraternal Order of Police and to represent police officers who were involved in shootings. Since 2001, I have represented 30 different officers who have been involved in shootings in North Dakota. Some of them fatal, some of them missed, some of them wounded the other individual. But that's a lot over time, and what I got to observe from those instances, and I get to these officers sometimes within a couple of hours of them shooting another individual. You need to understand there's a fundamental difference between the individual who wants to be an first armed responder and a police officer or law enforcement officer. Law enforcement officers don't ever want to be in a situation where they have to use their gun. This individual does. He wants to be that guy. He wants to be in front. He wants to be in that position. Law enforcement officers don't. Law enforcement officers, the goal of a law enforcement officer at the end of the day is to go home. That's what their goal is, ask them. In this bill, there are some problems. You've already heard about the South Dakota Sentinel program. I don't think it's well advised for the North Dakota legislature to tie a bill to South Dakota law in case they change it. And if you read the South Dakota law, it's not that good. On page 2, lines 10 through 11, you talk about a first armed responder who would be a retired law enforcement officer. That's a great idea. A retired law enforcement officer, and then the bill continues, or anybody else who applies. So you've run the gamut. You've run the gamut between somebody who is very experienced, who's confronted bad guys on a daily or weekly basis, to somebody who never has. And I would suggest to you that you want to try to find the most experienced person that you can find. And that's not somebody with 80 hours of training. On page 3, lines 2 through 5. It says, pursuant to this provision, the school board shall inform local law enforcement in writing of the name of the authorized individual who participates in the program. Well, that's a good idea too. Why wouldn't you go further and tell the teachers and the staff who is the first armed responder? Why wouldn't you do that? So let's say there's an incident and a teacher looks out the window of their classroom door and they see their neighbor going down the hallway, and they walk out and say, "Hey, Tom," and he's the shooter. This only works if there's a team approach to it. The school board's got to be involved. The teachers have got to be involved. The staff have to be involved. The parents have to be involved. They're all stakeholders here. They're all talking about trying to protect their kids. Why wouldn't you have them involved in the process? Why wouldn't you let them know who's the first armed responder?
My question is, there's nothing in here that precludes it, though.
It doesn't preclude it, but it doesn't authorize it either. I think it would be better if it was authorized.
You would think it would be better if it was mandated.
Absolutely. That the teachers know who's the first armed responder, that the staff know, that the cook knows, that the bus drivers know.
Sure, but let's go back for a second, because language matters, as somebody always tells me. Authorized or mandated?
Mandated.
Okay.
In the last portion of, as I was researching this, and you've got all the studies and you've got all the statistics and all the rest of that, I came across a study that was done by the United States Department of Education, U.S. Health and Human Services, Homeland Security, the Justice Department, the FBI, and FEMA. They came up with a guide for developing high-quality school emergency operation plans. And in there, what they say is this: the possibility of an active shooter situation is not justification for the presence of firearms on campus in the hands of personnel other than law enforcement officers. So your Department of Justice, your FBI, your FEMA thinks that the only people that should have guns on school campuses are law enforcement officers. Situations, the 30 situations that I've been involved in representing officers who have shot individuals are incredibly confusing. They happen at a speed and with stress that I cannot imagine. In one of the first in one of the first shootings I was ever involved in, there were 4 officers who surrounded a guy. They were 6 to 8 feet away from him. They shot at him 11 times and they only hit him twice.
Is that in Belfield?
No, that was not in Belfield.
Because we were in that one together too, and that's almost the same identical scenario.
You and I represented various shooters in a situation in Belfield. This was not in Belfield. But a situation, one of the first situations I was involved in, Mr. Chairman, they weren't any farther away from the shooter than you and I were. There were 4 cops, experienced law enforcement officers. They shot at him 11 times, they only hit him twice. That means that they missed 9 times. Here's what I want you to understand and what I want you to think about. Everybody's in favor of school safety. Everybody's in favor of making our kids safe. Somebody with 80 hours of training who now has a gun in a school, who you want to put in a position which is secondary to combat. Can you think of a situation that is more stressful, besides combat, than facing off with an individual who's got a gun and intent, and you want to give him 80 hours of training? Make him a retired law enforcement officer, make him an experienced law enforcement officer. I just think 80 hours isn't enough. Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for any questions.